In the heart of downtown Chicago, surrounded by glittering skyscrapers and the non-stop hum of city life, there's a building most people walk right past, thinking it's just another office tower. But look closer. You'll see strange, narrow, triangular windows slit into its concrete facade. This isn't an office building. This is the Metropolitan Correctional Center, or MCC Chicago, one of the most secretive and controversial federal jails in America. From the outside, it's a silent, imposing tower. But inside, behind those concrete walls, men accused of some of the country's most serious crimes are held, waiting for trial. It's a place designed for isolation, for control, and for absolute silence. Yet, against all odds, two men did the impossible. They climbed out, through the roof, and vanished into the Chicago night. This is the incredible story of MCC Chicago and the Great Roof Escape. MCC Chicago isn't like any prison you've seen in the movies. Built in the 1970s, it was designed as a humane alternative to sprawling cell blocks, a vertical fortress stacked 28 stories high. But what that really means is it's a maze of concrete and steel. Each floor is its own isolated world, with tiny cells facing an inner atrium. There's no real sunlight, no fresh air, just those single, slit-like windows. And there's no yard. The only outdoor space is a small recreation area on the roof, encased in razor wire and thick fencing. That roof, meant to be the ultimate security measure, would soon become the most audacious escape route imaginable. Guards patrol like clockwork and cameras are said to watch every corner. Or so it seemed. Because at MCC Chicago, appearances can be incredibly deceiving. It all started with two men, Joseph Jose Banks and Kenneth Conley. Both were career criminals, specializing in bank robbery. They were smart, cunning, and surprisingly disciplined. They weren't your typical violent offenders. They were planners, thinkers, the kind of men who could look at an unbreakable system and immediately see its cracks. Sharing a cell inside MCC, they began to study everything. They memorized guard rotations, maintenance schedules, and even the architectural blueprints of their unit. They noticed the air vents above their bunks. They realized the constant noise of the city outside could mask the sound of metal being slowly cut. And they understood a critical secret. The walls of MCC were nearly as impenetrable as they appeared. And so, with patience and precision, their plan began to take shape. Banks and Conley transformed their tiny cell into a secret workshop. Using makeshift tools, a piece of scavenged metal, a wire, parts pulled from vents, they started cutting through the concrete and steel around the window, little by little, night after night. To hide their progress, they crafted a clever cover-up using cardboard, toothpaste, and paint they got from the prison's art supplies. To the guards doing their rounds, it looked like nothing had changed. But behind that carefully camouflaged wall, an escape route was slowly forming, an opening that led directly into a plumbing shaft that ran all the way to the top of the building. They timed everything with military precision. They knew exactly how long it took guards to make their rounds. They practiced climbing inside their small cell. And they created something most inmates only dream of, decoy dummies. They stuffed clothes and paper under their blankets, shaping them to look like sleeping bodies. Every single detail mattered. Every second was accounted for. Because once they started their final move, there would be no turning back. The night of December 17, 2012, was freezing cold in Chicago. Inside MCC, the city lights flickered through the narrow windows, and guards were making their routine checks. Everything was normal. But on the 17th floor, Banks and Conley silently removed the fake wall. The hole was ready. One by one, they squeezed into the vent, then into the dark, claustrophobic maintenance shaft. There was no light, no sound except for the low hum of the building's electrical systems. They began to climb, story after story, pulling themselves up through the guts of the skyscraper until they reached the roof. A heavy steel grate and a layer of razor wire were all that stood between them and freedom. But they were prepared. Using a long, knotted rope made from dozens of torn bedsheets, they began to lower themselves down the side of the 28-story building. It was one of the most dangerous and daring prison escapes in American history. Below them, Chicago was alive with cars, sirens, and trains, but nobody thought to look up. Like shadows against the concrete, they rappelled down the wall. And when their feet finally touched the ground, they melted into the city streets. They were free. Morning came. A guard making his rounds noticed something strange in cell 1705. The two beds were made perfectly, a little too perfect. When he pulled back the sheets, the faces staring up at him weren't real. They were dummies, crafted from newspaper, socks, and toothpaste. By the time the alarm finally sounded, Banks and Conley had been gone for hours. Chaos erupted. The FBI swarmed downtown Chicago. Helicopters circled the skyscraper. News reporters gathered outside, all in disbelief. The idea that 2 inmates could escape from a high-security federal facility, right in the middle of one of America's biggest cities, was unthinkable. But it had happened. And MCC Chicago would never be seen the same way again. The entire city was immediately turned into a massive manhunt zone. The FBI, U.S. Marshals, and the Chicago Police Department launched an all-out search. They traced clues, bus tickets, cash withdrawals, and witness sightings. Jose Banks, always the showman, couldn't resist calling news outlets to boast about how he'd done the impossible. Conley, on the other hand, stayed quiet, trying to blend into the urban chaos. But their freedom didn't last long. Within 2 days, Banks was caught, found hiding out in a South Side apartment. Conley managed to evade capture for nearly 2 weeks, a ghost in the city. But his luck ran out when a sharp-eyed Chicago police officer recognized him near a train station. The chase was over. The 2 escapees were back in custody, but their names were already etched into American prison legend. In the aftermath, the questions came fast and furious. How could this happen in one of the most secure federal jails in the country? How did 2 men manage to cut through a wall, climb to the roof, and rappel down 28 stories without a single person noticing? The answers were buried in years of bureaucracy, chronic understaffing, outdated security systems, and a dangerous sense of complacency. For decades, MCC Chicago had relied on its imposing design and its reputation as an inescapable fortress. But all it took was 2 determined inmates to expose its flaws for the entire world to see. To this day, the roof escape remains one of the boldest prison breaks in U.S. history. And while the tower still stands tall in the heart of Chicago, its walls no longer seem quite so invincible. After the chaos faded, MCC Chicago went back to its rhythm. The doors locked on schedule, inmates shouted messages through the air vents, and guards walked their predictable rounds. From the street below, life continued uninterrupted. Tourists walked past the imposing triangular building, completely unaware that just a few meters above their heads, hundreds of inmates were locked away. But inside, the atmosphere had changed forever. Every inmate, every guard, every official knew what had happened. The roof, which had once symbolized impenetrable security, had become a symbol of failure and defiance. For some inmates, the escape was proof that freedom was still possible, even in a place designed to crush hope. For others, it was a dangerous fantasy, a reckless gamble that could have gotten people killed. And for the officers, it was a profound humiliation. Every single day, they had to look up at that same rooftop, knowing that 2 men had stood there and beaten the system. The silence of the concrete walls was broken. MCC Chicago had been cracked, not physically, but psychologically. To understand why this escape was so significant, you have to understand the hidden world of MCC Chicago. It's always been more than just a holding center. It's the place where the accused meet the federal system head-on. Mob bosses, white-collar criminals, gang leaders, and high-profile defendants have all passed through its doors, waiting for trial in the courthouse just across the street. Each inmate inside those distinctive, slit-like triangular windows lives suspended between guilt and freedom. No one is sentenced there forever, yet for many, it feels like an eternity. You can see the city lights twinkle through the window. You can hear the rumble of the L train. On a good day, you can even smell the wind coming off Lake Michigan. But you can't touch any of it. That's what makes MCC different from other prisons. It constantly taunts you with the illusion of freedom. And maybe, just maybe, that illusion was exactly what drove Joseph Banks and Kenneth Conley to risk everything. Because when you can see freedom right outside your window, so close you can almost taste it, it can become an obsession. Today, the rooftop at MCC Chicago looks pretty much the same. It's just concrete, fencing, barbed wire, and sky. But for those who know its story, it's so much more than a slab of grey. It's a constant, silent reminder that no matter how strong a prison looks, it's never truly unbreakable. Even now, some guards say that on windy nights, when they're on the top floors, they can sometimes hear a faint rattling from the vents, like something moving in the dark. They say the wind that whips across the rooftop seems to carry whispers. Not of ghosts, but of plans, of patience, of the quiet, rhythmic sound of a hacksaw against steel. And sometimes, they'll look over the edge, 28 stories down, imagining those 2 silhouettes sliding into the night, vanishing beneath the Chicago lights. It's a sight that, even in their imagination, still makes their hands shake. The escape of Banks and Conley wasn't just about breaking out of a prison. It was about exposing one. It forced the entire Bureau of Prisons to rethink its security protocols, to inspect every federal facility, and to admit that overconfidence can be a warden's worst enemy. It proved that even the strongest walls can crumble when people stop paying attention. But the story goes deeper than that. It became a mirror, reflecting the raw human instinct to fight, to think, to find a way out, no matter what the odds are. Some saw them as just two more criminals. Others saw them as proof of what desperation can forge. Either way, their escape is now woven into the very DNA of MCC. And every inmate who looks up at that roof knows the legend. Because in that silent tower of steel, two men once turned the impossible into history. There's a thin line inside MCC Chicago, an invisible line that separates fear from fascination. Guards walk it every single day, knowing that behind every locked door is a mind that is calculating, observing, and waiting. Inmates walk it too, knowing that one small, overlooked opportunity could change everything. Banks and Conley were ordinary men, but they had extraordinary patience. They weren't supervillains or violent masterminds. They were just two humans who studied a system, understood it, and then exploited its flaws. And that's what makes their story linger, long after the press coverage faded, long after they were captured and returned to custody, long after the alarms finally stopped ringing. Inside MCC, silence has weight. Every footstep echoes. Every door closing reverberates through the concrete. And somewhere, between the clanging of steel and the low hum of fluorescent lights, there's a whisper. Anything is possible if you're willing to wait, to plan, and to risk it all. The guards, now hardened veterans of the system, still glance at the rooftop from time to time. Some wonder if another attempt could ever succeed. Others just shake their heads at the sheer audacity of it all. But every one of them remembers the sound that was NT there, the sound of two men slipping through the cracks and into the night. In the months that followed, the story spread far beyond Chicago. Podcasts dissected every detail. Books mentioned it in chapters dedicated to impossible escapes. Even inmates in other federal prisons across the country whispered about the roof that two men conquered. It became more than just a jailbreak. It became a symbol. It was a stark reminder that no fortress is perfect, a warning that systems built for control can never fully contain human ingenuity and desperation. MCC Chicago remained standing, a monument of concrete and steel, guarded by surveillance cameras. But the legend of the roof escape casts a long shadow that no fence or lock can ever erase. Of course, every story has a cost. For Banks and Conley, their brief taste of freedom was followed by months in solitary confinement once they were recaptured. For the guards on duty, it was the professional humiliation of a system exposed on their watch. For the prison itself, it meant intense scrutiny from the highest levels of government, forcing reforms, new inspections, and permanent changes to daily routines. And for the public, it was a powerful reminder that freedom isn't just an abstract concept. It's a desire so deep, so raw, that even the most secure prisons in the world can't completely extinguish it. The concrete walls of MCC Chicago may hold people, but they can never truly hold the idea of freedom. And that idea, sometimes, finds a way out. Years later, when the snow falls on that rooftop, when the wind howls between the downtown skyscrapers, when the city lights flicker in the distance, the roof of MCC Chicago still haunts those who know its story. Here's the twist no one saw coming. Years after Banks and Conley escaped, their story became a case study, not just for law enforcement, but for the inmates themselves. Inside MCC Chicago, nothing seems to have changed. The doors still clang shut, and the cameras still watch. But something invisible has shifted. Guards say newer inmates often stare at the rooftop in silence, tracing the vents with their eyes, measuring distances in their minds. The story of two men slipping away has become a legend, a whisper of freedom that can't be silenced. In a building designed to crush hope, that whisper is dangerous. MCC Chicago wasn't just a place they escaped from, it's a place they changed forever. Even today, every beam and window carries a memory of defiance. The real question is, if two men could vanish into the night, how many others are quietly watching, waiting for their moment?